and wanted to let you all know that if you prefer not to be recorded, then you should turn off your camera so that you're not captured. However, we do record these sessions so that we can share it with others who are attending CEE who couldn't be with us, and more broadly, those in our creativity community who couldn't join the Creativity Expert Exchange. And then eventually these get loaded up in our YouTube channel so that they can be available to the broader world. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this session, Teaching Creative Thinking in Higher Education, Concepts and Techniques. We have a team of presenters. I will introduce each briefly. I've already warned them that I will not read their entire bios, otherwise we would take up the 45 minutes that we have for the session. We don't want to do that. So I am giving you just highlights of who they are each and their accomplishments. So first of all, I want to introduce Dr. Hector Ramos. Hector is currently a faculty member at Texas A&M University. He teaches the Creative Studies minor for undergraduates, including subjects on creative problem solving, lateral thinking, six thinking hats, and personal creativity and giftedness. He also teaches Introduction to Educational Psychology, Child Development, Educational Statistics, and Introduction to Survey Research. And let me say that he is a graduate of the Buffalo State Master of Science degree in Creativity and Change Leadership. Welcome, Hector. Zen Aziz is a corporate educator, musician, writer, and ICF licensed coach. He graduated from Rice University in 2018 and currently works as an educational consultant with Accenture while simultaneously pursuing his master's in education in educational psychology. Third member of this team is Meredith Prater. Meredith is an early childhood educator with 20 years of experience in supporting young children and their parents during their early learning years, a current MED Master of Education student in educational psychology at Texas A&M. Meredith has incorporated creativity in her teaching through writing curriculum, planning innovative and interactive lessons, developing new courses, and finding innovative ways to involve parents in their child's learning. And finally, Amanda Morales is the fourth member of the team delivering this concurrent session, which, by the way, the session goes to the top of the hour Eastern New York time zone. That will be 1 o'clock. I will read it in the first person as Amanda wrote her bio. After graduating with an MED in educational psychology, with a focus on creativity and cognition in December of 2024. Congratulations. My family and I decided that it was best for me to stay home with my 1-year-old daughter in order for me to continue my education and be the ultimate operations manager in my home. Amanda, congratulations both on your degree and on your newborn-ish child. So thanks for being with us. Hector, I will turn it to you. We will try to reserve some time at the end for a bit of Q&A. And with that, Hector, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you and your team.
Thank you. I want to thank Meredith, Amanda, and Zen for joining me and taking this challenge, which is a creative challenge in itself. As you know, if you check the program, the title has already changed. It's an act of creativity. I included the word challenges, which should have been the first word. Growing creatively in class, teaching creativity in higher ed, concepts, techniques, and challenges. I may share just one. Because of time, I want to give more time to the rest of the participants. So next slide. I wanted to share with you some of the books that we use in the classroom. These are good references for all of us, even and you will have other textbooks or books that you are. These are books for 3 different classes. So next slide. What I wanted to share to you about is a little bit about my experience in FC 624, teaching this last semester online with 42 students, and this semester in person with about 7 students, and 3 of them from different nations. We did something extremely creative, which was I took the challenge of asking 42 students to interview experts and create a podcast. And then I want to share something about thinking tools. So next slide. So why do we study creativity? This is something I try to explain to my students again and again and again. And then I ask them, how do you share what you learned here? And they tell me that it's not easy. It's not easy because um, of the challenge of thinking about your thinking. It's called metacognition. Every single thing about creative thinking is metacognition. We are trying to help people to engage deliberately in different ways of thinking, depending on the challenge they have at hand. Now, what I find is a lot of things in creativity are extremely interesting and fun, and people are also out for the fun part and the interesting part. I love this. So the whole thing I'm asking my students every week is, so if that was so interesting, in what ways was it useful? How can you use that? And the usefulness is as important or more important than finding things interesting. So that's the big challenge of creative thinking, is that most of the stories you read, most of the things, they are very inspiring, but doesn't mean that are necessarily transformational. And one of the reasons that we are facing that is number point two, is that we do have a bias towards knowledge, and that's why we have exams where we say, what can you remember? And so instead of skills, the skills are, I believe, extremely important, because you go to a company, you are going to have a skill set that you need to provide the company in terms of, this is what I can do. And not what's the point of knowing a lot and being able to do very little. So I believe that that the skill set that creative thinking provides is unique and extremely valuable, even though it's not always very easy to deliver in terms of how to explain it. So if I tell you, for instance, thinking in terms of questions is extremely useful, and I will give you a tool for that and a reference. Well, that doesn't sell. I'm so sorry, it doesn't sell. If other people are not thinking that way, is you have to get them into experience where they prove it, and they say, "Oh, now I get it," because you get them to experience. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to give you some takeaways. That's great too. So you come after this. I interviewed Matteo from Bologna, Italy, and he wrote a paper on the design thinking mindset. So they develop an instrument, and you can copy that or take a picture, whatever, or you get the slides eventually. So that is a free tool that you can use to assess your your design thinking mindset. So what I'm always asking students is, so how are we going to differentiate between becoming extremely very good at creative thinking and becoming creative? And that the whole thing here is that creativity, beyond the thinking, it takes another two components, and one of them is social, and the other one is emotional. So the moment you engage in creative behavior, you're going to grow emotionally and socially, and those are risky areas because that's not so easy to assess. See, I'm not going to give you an A because now you are a better risk taker. Okay, but the whole thing is cognition versus action. So as you can see, these are some concepts, but they are also challenges. And now we are going to move very soon into the tools. In fact, the whole thing, and I'm able to work with anybody who is interested. I put my email there, and I put it at the end of the session. I find these presentations like a bridge to connect with people. You want to know more? I can send you some reading, some activities, some applications, some projects that you can help yourself or other people to get engaged in creative thinking and creativity. And creativity, what is something you can do? So, because very often when we think about creativity, we're thinking about the big C, the big change. What is the big change? The amazing thing I can do? What I tell my students is, well, what is the small thing you can do? What is the smallest non-threatening initiative or action you can do that is creative and gets you in the path of creativity? So you experience new things. Oh, I'm so glad I get to experience this. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to experience something else. So very often, the more you experience life around you, and the more you become what I call, you develop a proactive mindset instead of a reactive mindset. And it's amazing because we have a job, we have to do this, we have a to-do list, and very often we just in a reactive mindset most of the time, instead of saying, let me slow down. Now, what do I decide to do? What are my options? And why are these options available to me? And which is the best one? Next slide. Aziz, thank you. So this thing about I wanted to tell you a little bit about the interviews. It was an amazing experience for most of the students. Some of the introverts, they suffered it, but I think they grew through it. They grew through it, and it was good. I had to find 42 experts, so I basically reached out to 200, and then I scheduled them, and I scheduled with someone in Mexico that was doing the recording. And then I tried to help everyone in coming up with questions that were meaningful. And you do that. And then I did 10 interviews myself. So I have one link that I just want to, but if you go to Dragon Stereo's in YouTube, Dragon Stereo YouTube channel, you can find all of them. But the one that I wanted to highlight is South African expert on creativity, Cobus Nithling, and I think I misspelled that, never mind. And this was Meredith Prater with Nestor in Van Zon, and they did a great job. And one of the things that I learned, I listened to the whole thing, and the last part, I was very, very touched. And Cobus said that we do a lot about cognition, but we don't do enough about passion and risk taking. So that got me to think about it and in what ways I can help my students to engage, to develop a passion about this, and also to become a little bit more proficient in risk taking. Next slide, I think. So Dr. Puccio will be very happy that I took this slide from his creative leadership book. So this is I given a reference there, creative leadership skills that drive change. So because this is one of my favorite tools, it's called webbing. So buy the book or go to Google and download this chapter. And then why do I think that this questions, asking questions about the why, what's stopping is so useful, is because it helps you to clarify. But the fact is that you can go even further. Now I have 2 or 3 stages. I want to share only one with you because I just don't want to get too complicated. But the whole thing that I use this tool, by the way, as an activity with my motivation and learning class. Just because I told people, if you're asking the why, very likely you will be find sources of motivation. Why are you doing things? But then I combine that with self-determination theory, which has 3 different components. One of belonging, the other one is competence, the third one is autonomy. So I realized that some of these questions could be more about belonging or one of those 3 areas. Or maybe those questions are only about one area and we have not considered the other 2. So I ask questions, what are the questions you can think about belonging that have to do with this issue? And so some of them said, well, how might I create a network of people that I can work with to co-publish, or they could become my mentors, or I can be part of that association. So what are the different networks where I can belong to that can help me prosper or become more effective at publishing? So by connecting these 2 areas, there was another source of motivation, and they got it and they found, well, this is interesting. Okay, so I think I have 50 seconds, but I'm going to give that to my next speaker, which is Zen.
Thank you, Dr. Ramos. Again, we're going to have some time at the end for questions, but I'll get right into it. So all of us here were part of Dr. Ramos's class, and I think we all learned a lot of great things. As you heard from Gerard, my background is in creativity, emotion. Specifically, I have some background in emotional intelligence coaching, and so that's kind of the angle I want to bring to this. So the overlap between creativity and emotion, right? As you've heard from Dr. Ramos, there are cognitive, emotional, and social components to creativity. But what I want to talk about is what this actually looks like in practice. So again, as Dr. Ramos mentioned, we had the incredible opportunity to interview some experts in creativity. And I spoke to Matteo Catullo, who I felt gave me some really, really powerful advice in terms of the cognitive, emotional, and social aspects of creativity. So one of the things he mentioned that was so important in his creative journey is knowing yourself and planning for yourself. And so as a creative, knowing yourself intimately, right, it helps you find the things that spur your creativity and allow you to better channel your emotions into your creativity. One thing that Matteo suggested to me was planning for the future you. He said, look 5 years down the road and think about the things you need for yourself. And in practice, I think I do this as well. So in my work in consulting, I have some pretty heavy projects sometimes, and knowing myself as a creative, I know that all that work can burn me out. So it's important to set myself every month or so some sort of break. And that's one way you can begin to know yourself and plan for yourself to make your creativity a little bit stronger, in the sense that sometimes we all do burn out, but knowing yourself really helps you plan for those moments better. And along those lines, find the right people, find your people. Uh, Matteo mentioned that finding the people who help you learn and grow and challenge your mindset is one of the most important things when it comes to creativity and kind of building a wider array of skill sets and opinions and knowledge. That brings me to my second point, which is seek out new perspectives. So one thing that he mentioned to me that really stuck with me is that you can learn the most from the people that you don't like, or more specifically, the people that get on your nerves. And I think that speaks a lot to empathy and emotion, and all the time we're getting different perspectives, but it's really hard to take those perspectives and make them our own. But part of creativity is taking different angles to look at different problems. And so when you get new experiences, when you get new perspectives, it allows you to internalize those, build empathy for those, and then that in turn improves your creativity. And that kind of brings me to my final point, which is learn more than you teach. So you may have heard this before, but you can learn a lot more from asking than you can from telling. And so one thing Matteo shared with me is that his travels, especially to Japan, were really eye-opening for him. When you go to a new culture and maybe you can't speak the language, you do still pick up on a lot of cultural differences, a lot of cultural practices, and a lot of unspoken ways that people speak to each other. And those types of things really change how you think and open your mind to new perspectives. And so all in all, Matteo taught me some really important lessons about, the cognitive, social, and emotional aspects of creativity, and some of these growth exercises that he used to pursue growth as a creative. Along these lines, one of the biggest things I learned from Matteo was this overlap between creativity and empathy. And so throughout Dr. Ramos's class, we had a lot of different opportunities to self-reflect and do activities that made us think about, how do I think about this situation? What I saw from my work separately in combination with our class was that creativity and empathy are very closely linked, right? As creatives, we must make the best use of ourselves, right? So take a second to think about that, right? We have our skill set. When you know yourself well, you can use yourself as a tool to best accomplish your goals. And so what I have here on the right is something I use in my own practice, which is Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence quadrant. And I won't go through it all, but what it breaks down to is knowing yourself, managing yourself, understanding your environment, and best being able to adapt to your environment. And I think those are all key components of creativity as well. And so that brings me to how might we actually put this in practice? In my experience, journaling is one of the most powerful things that you could do. And I know that there's a bad rap around journaling, or the kind of rap that it's, just talking about your feelings. But in a second here, I'm going to go into why I think journaling is so powerful and how I personally journal to improve my creativity. First, I want to take a look at a quote by Steve Jobs, which is, creativity is just connecting things. When you ask a creative person how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences that they've had and synthesize new things. And the reason they're able to do that is because they've had more experiences than other people. I think that speaks really, really directly to how empathy and creativity are linked, right? The amount of experiences you have and how you use and internalize those experiences really allows you to think from different perspectives and then create from different perspectives. A couple of the books that Dr. Ramos mentioned by Keith Sawyer and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi both mention the power of connecting ideas. Similar to what Steve Jobs said, they mentioned that connecting dissimilar ideas has been found to increase brain activation in several regions, including the anterior cingulate cortex and the frontal medial gyrus. And why I bring this up is because when we look at those areas of the brain, we can notice that they're involved in both creativity, higher order thought, and self-regulation, specifically emotional regulation. And when you see this crossover, you realize, wow, if these same areas of the brain are performing these same types of tasks, then maybe improving them in one way will improve them in the other. And I think that's exactly what I'm getting at, right? And so how do we put this into practice? How can journaling, connecting ideas, improve our creativity and our emotional intelligence? Well, it all goes down to improving your memory, connecting your ideas, and giving you more points for reflection. So I'll take a step back and think about how I journal, right? Typically, people think of journaling as sitting down, writing about your day, but I don't take that approach at all. In fact, as you can see on the right, I use my Notes app in my iPhone to do most of my journaling, if not all my journaling. And when I do so, I don't sit down and write for 30 minutes or an hour. In fact, I just write down every idea I have, and then I categorize those ideas. So within your Notes app, if you choose to go this way, you can create folders and you can also create hashtags. And this has been really powerful for me in that anytime I have, an idea for a new business or an idea for something that I want to write about, I'll put down 2 sentences, hashtag it, move it to a folder. And therefore, anytime in the future I'm thinking, hey, I have this brilliant idea. Didn't I have something like this a while ago? It allows you to go back in time, really easily find that previous idea and connect them. And again, connecting ideas is what leads to this type of growth we see in creativity and in emotion. When you're able to recognize, hey, I'm feeling this way, and I felt this way 6 months ago, that creates a learning in your brain that, hey, have I really changed? What might I need to change? And again, all of these processes are closely tied both to emotion and to creativity. And so in practice, what I would recommend in terms of your journaling practices is 1, write down all your ideas. Don't have any judgment. Don't, put your feelings into it. Just give it exactly how you're thinking in the moment, because that's powerful in itself, your raw thoughts, your raw emotions. And second, organize your ideas. Find a way that works for you that you can go back and reflect easily on each of your ideas. And then finally, find the time to look back at these ideas. And sometimes it's hard to have these ideas, but what I definitely recommend in addition to these 3 points is find some creative outlets, whether that's drawing, whether that's cooking, whether that's singing, whether that's even at work, using your creativity to build more creative PowerPoints or speeches or whatever you do for work. Being able to do those things and then connect them through your thoughts and through your reflection is what's going to lead to this powerful growth. And so I'll leave it at that. Those are some of the things that I learned from Dr. Ramos's class, and very excited today to be able to share that with you. I think journaling is really powerful, and I hope that moving forward, some of you guys begin to journal as a way to improve your creativity and your emotional intelligence. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Meredith.
Thank you, Zen. Thank you very much. So I am Meredith Prater, and I'm going to spend my portion of our time today talking about kind of my creative journey from where I was when I started Dr. Ramos's creative thinking class and how it impacted me personally and professionally than where I am at this point coming out on the other side. So if you'll move the slides in. Before taking the creative thinking class, I had a lot of what I considered creative experiences in my life and my background, but I thought about them in terms of personal creativity, creative writing, the performing arts, participating in those in a lot of different ways. I have been an educator for many years, mostly with younger children, and I thought about fostering creativity in my classroom. For a little while, I ran a program called the South Austin Creativity Lab, which was an enrichment program for younger elementary children, where we did a lot of creative endeavors that were all, we did cooking, we did science, we did theater-based, we did a lot of visual arts. And that really was the umbrella under which I thought about creativity and creative thinking. So last fall, as part of my master's program, I took the creative thinking course online. And it really broadened my view of creativity and really challenged me to think about what all the term creativity encompassed. And I really went from thinking about creativity in the personal domain to thinking about it as really a larger, broader concept about the different ways it impacts not just our own personal lives, but all of the different ecosystems around us, and how it impacts industry, how it impacts a lot of different things. And I also really went from thinking about creativity I would use the term as sort of expansion, taking something and broadening it to really thinking about creation of something new. What is really bringing a new idea that has never been seen before, and the significance of that big C, creativity. And through the class, I'll talk a little bit more about it, had a chance to really see how that impacts people's lives and impacts things that are being done. In terms of the format of the class, we had a lot of time with it being an online class, a lot of independent exercises, and then we did a lot of sharing and reflecting through online discussion forums. And I enjoyed that format because we got to see through discussion and also through some visuals that our classmates would upload, how other people were thinking differently and creatively about the same assignments that we were doing. So that was really informative and a broadening experience. And then finally, the course in general, just with the sort of a focus on divergent and convergent thinking, and really looking at getting a lot of ideas out there, thinking in really broad terms, and then how we narrow those ideas back down was a theme that came up for me several times in the class. So Zen, if you'll go to the next slide, please. As has been mentioned, we did do the online interviews last fall in the class. I was able to do 2 interviews, and I loved this experience. One was with, as Dr. Ramos mentioned, with Cobus, who works in a lot of creativity development and with a lot of different industries. And he was actually a student of Dr. Paul Torrance, and it was really interesting to hear about his experiences working with him. That was a great opportunity. And I also interviewed Steve Brody, who works in research and development in the field of science in Australia. They were very exciting conversations. It was an opportunity to talk with these professionals that I would not have had outside of the class, and to hear how broad and open-minded they are, and how over time they've really become expert through practicing in their work and creativity at identifying creative ideas, and when how to identify things that
Do we have a problem?
We may have lost Meredith.
Well, I think, let's finish off that.
So
Okay,
that was that was a great experience, a real growth experience, and I saw an expanded understanding of applied creativity, which also was a theme for me in the class, and I'll come back to that when I talk about our final project. But Zen, if you'll go to the next slide. In the book by Keith Sawyer, Zigzag, we had several different topics and exercises that we worked through. And I just highlighted 3 of my favorites. One was on the topic of ask, and the fishbone and stretch and squeeze exercises were 2 different things where, again, we had that divergent thinking where we put a lot of different ideas on paper, and then we narrowed them down to look at how multiple solutions and processes and thinking through them could help highlight what was really the problem, what were really some themes, and how we could then determine some solutions and find the ones that would work. Then in the chapter on learn, as an educator, I appreciated this. There was a lot of discussion about an acknowledgement of the need to master the basics and to really have depth of learning in a field in order to then grow that field and take it to the next level, and how that depth of knowledge could really form a base for moving forward. And again, as a teacher, that kind of struck me, but also thought it was really valuable. And then for the topic on think, we chose a simple common object and listed as many uses as came to mind. And this is a really doable, really valuable exercise that could be applied in a lot of ways. And I believe we had a time frame, and we were supposed to keep listing uses for a certain amount of time. And you would come to the end of your list and think, that's all I can think of, but I've got another 60 seconds. And it really pushed me to really be creative and really stretch, what are the uses? What could I come up with that I wouldn't have thought of if I didn't have that kind of extra push? So it was just a helpful exercise that I can see being valuable in a lot of places. Zen, if you'll hop to the next slide, this is just a brief example of the fishbone exercise. It was very easy to do, but very useful. I used it for my professional work in an early childhood program where we were having some difficulty about some logistical things. And there was a team of us trying to sort it out. So it was helpful for me. Zen, if you'll go on. this is my last slide. I wanted to talk a few minutes about the final project. We had a few different choices, and I had enjoyed the interviews. I did a lot. So I chose the activity to interview 5 different experts in their own field and in different fields about creativity, about how they used it, how they identified it. And I had an entrepreneur. I had someone who is a very successful VP for a national company. I had someone who's a very successful interior designer. I had someone who's a director of an early childhood program. And then I had someone who works in, who's also an entrepreneur and does a lot of different things, but works primarily in events, but has their fingers in a lot of different activities. It was really interesting to hear from people what they consider creativity to be. People who would say, you know, I've never stopped and thought about this before, but as they started to reflect on it, really had a lot of creativity in their professional lives and were really being very successful because of their creativity. It was interesting to hear how they would see it. These were all people who were in levels of leadership in their industries, and how they would look for creativity in the people they hired, or how they would see creativity in the people who worked for them, and how they would really determine where it was valuable and where people could have success with that. They also had a lot of strong opinions about whether they thought it was innate or whether they thought it was learned, or and how they thought people developed creativity, which these are just their personal opinions. So it was interesting to contrast that with things that we had learned in our class. And there were some different areas where people kind of had 2 different camps of thought without speaking to each other about where they saw these things developing in their work. They really enjoyed reflecting on creativity in their lives, which I thought was valuable in and of itself. And it added a lot to my understanding of all the different industries that creativity is valued in, and about how creativity really, in all of these different fields, is often what sets successful people apart. It's the people who are able to really create something new, who are really able to take something to a level that it hasn't been before, because they had an idea and they were confident enough to take the risks, to learn about it and to pursue it and make something with it. At this point, I'm going to pass the baton to Amanda. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Meredith. So last but definitely not least, I do want to share a little bit with you guys about the lost art of creativity, right? So we've already talked about all of the amazing things that can be accomplished through creativity, and how this art has slowly become like this thing that we imagine is so abstract, but it's actually not. Go ahead. You can go to the next slides then. Okay, so this is a concept. The fact that creativity is a skill that can be taught is a concept that I had such a hard time wrapping my mind around during my graduate program, because all I could think to myself was, there's no way that this is a skill that can be taught even years after you have grown out of your childhood stages, grown out of your adolescence. This is still something that you can learn, right? And not only that, but how beneficial is that to those of us that are adults, no matter what field you are in? So in order to facilitate growth within ourselves, we must always remain willing to acquire a new skill. Facilitating creativity is no longer necessarily a priority in schools, but is now slowly becoming something that small businesses and corporations are investing in. Go ahead, Zen. So one of the things, and I'm sorry about the overlap on the title and the information, but one of the individuals that I really enjoyed learning about during my program, I took multiple classes with Dr. Ramos, so I can't even pinpoint like which one it was, because there were I think it was more than 4 courses that I took with Professor Ramos. So my favorite individual that we did talk about was Edward DeBono, and how he established or created or took this like abstract concept of creativity and put it into a format in which we can understand, right? So what he did was establish this concept of the 6 thinking hats, right? And these different kinds of thinking, we already do these things every single day. But through the 6 thinking hats, we now have the ability to put a name on it, a description, a color, to further understand this kind of questioning, right? So Edward de Bono was focused on increasing productivity through creativity. This generates genuine creative thinking. Most, if not all, the hats are actually used on a daily basis. So, for example, if you were to take a look at the yellow hat, it symbolizes brightness and optimism. This is the one hat where we are able to establish and generate positive thinking, positive questioning. In a similar format, we have things like the white hat, right? What kind of information do we need to be able to answer a question? This is how we use the white hat. This is where we find the facts and move on to the next type of hat. Okay. And then, of course, we have the black hat, which signifies caution. The green hat focuses on creativity and possibilities, as well as alternative ideas. The blue hat is used to manage the thinking process overall. So this is where your guidelines come from. And then the red hat signifies feelings and hunches. So maybe these things that you're thinking of as you're going through a productivity type process as negative things, like I have a gut feeling that maybe this is going to work, or I have a gut feeling this is not going to work. And so the concept in general of the 6 thinking hats is pretty broad, right? So let's go ahead and put it into a perspective that's a little bit more relatable to real life, right? Go ahead, Zen. So funny enough, this course or this concept actually helped me come to a decision to quit my teaching job. Now, while we do have a national shortage of teachers, there are those of us individuals that have decided to leave teaching to either pursue additional education, pursue a different career, or honestly are just completely burned out and want to use those skills that they've developed in the teaching realm of education and take those skills elsewhere. So how I figured this out, right, was going through the 6 thinking hat process for just one question. And the question that I used was, how might I was just a teacher at this point, help teachers find a positive and effective work-life balance? Now, this is a question that definitely torments our teachers a lot of the time because we have a tendency of taking our work home with us. We have a tendency of overextending ourselves to the point where we skip lunch. So I started thinking about ways that we could make this better, right? As I went through each hat, I slowly started thinking, like, for whatever reason, this is not working. Maybe it just doesn't work for me. I'm not sure, right? So I continued to use that same question for multiple different activities. And in this activity, I could not even believe that I was literally in the process of understanding that I think it's time for me to quit my job. And I think it's time for me to try something else or try something different. And at that point in both my educational career and my career as a teacher, all I could think about was the what ifs, right? What if I quit my job and I'm unhappy? Or what if I quit my job and I don't know what to do after that? This is where the creative thinking component comes in, right? So on both of these images, these are both assignments, 2 completely different assignments that were done by myself, but still addressing the same concepts, right? Of generating thinking in a productive way, but also addressing what it is that you're feeling as an individual. Go ahead, Sen.
I think that was it. That's what I had. Yeah, but we have 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah,
Amanda, if you don't mind.
I'm completely done.
Thank you.
So
3
I will
minutes for
yield
questions.
my
If
time.
anybody has a question, yes, we can. I have 3 students who can answer.
Then maybe we can stop the screen share so it's easier for us to see the gallery as well and to see your faces. Thank you, Hector. So as Hector pointed out, we've got a few minutes. If anyone, this is a small group of 31 of us. So Hector, if you're comfortable with it, I'm just going to invite folks to flip on their microphones and just, oh, I see Troy has his hand up. So Troy, you beat the microphones. Go ahead, sir.
Awesome. Thanks for the presentation. One thought I was just having was I've done some creative problem solving training in the past, and there's kind of two ways to go about working on a challenge together. You can come up with a team challenge that everyone can work on and contribute ideas to, which I just did in a recent training, and it's great. It creates a lot of kind of team energy. And then there's the other way of doing it, which is as you're showing here, like everyone kind of focuses on a personal challenge and personal goals, and it really, I think, maybe fosters that intrinsic kind of motivation. I'm wondering, sharing your experience on that and what you've found is a good and practical, effective way to do it to make it stick also to make it stick and give people a great experience.
Thank you for the question, Troy.
Anybody wants to answer? Go ahead. What my answer to that would be always try to have surprising or unique information or unique experience at least once a semester, and that's why I decided to bring up these interviews so that that would be a unique experience with people that could help them remember for the future.
Mm.
Yep. I will also add, and maybe this is aside from your point, Troy, but I think from my perspective, right, they both accomplish different goals, the team activity versus the individual, and the team gives you a little bit more of that social component of understanding how other people think. And so I think both have their merits. And they should be done in combination. Both of those should be experiences, both taking an activity and doing it individually to a personal problem, but then also maybe doing that same activity as a group to understand how do other people think about this activity.
Cool. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Troy. One piece of research just to build on the responses. What we found in terms of stickiness of training is that people have a strong association with tools that provide them with a personal insight. Those are the tools they're most likely to remember, which might reinforce the value of personal application. So, Dr. Ramos and our team, I'm going to go to the chat box. There's one question that I think we can all relate to, and we'll use this as the final question. This comes from Kyle. Why are most people so oblivious, love that term, about the need for creativity when LinkedIn is swarming with C-suite executives preaching the need for creativity skills? And I would say there's more talk about creativity than just in LinkedIn, World Economic Forum, and so many other lists of 21st century skills feature creativity. So the question is, if it's being talked about so much, why are we lacking in a true focus on skill development in this area? Any opinions on that?
Well, I think that the mindset in education, I can only talk about education, which is where I am, higher education, is that we have compromised by always looking into the transfer of knowledge. Read this book, do this test, what can you remember? It's not how you can think. Now, critical thinking it's been established as something useful, but creative thinking has not even been understood by the majority of professors because it's risky and it's not so easy to assess. So whatever is not easy to assess is not important. Well, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that.
Well, that's where AI may help us because as Dr. Lubart mentioned, and he also cited Beatty out of Penn State, which, by the way, there's a test site for AI as a tool to evaluate creativity, much like the Torrance test of creative thinking, which is very time consuming. To your point, Hector, it takes a while. It takes a high level of sophistication and training, but AI is making that process so much easier. Amanda, your hand, I'm curious to get your input to this perplexing question that we have. It seems to be in demand, but education seems not to meet this great demand. Do you have thoughts on that? I saw your hand was up earlier.
Yes, sir. So in a lot of ways, creativity, as I mentioned in the presentation, the word itself generates such abstract thought, right? So you assume that creativity is like this imaginary thing that happens in your mind, and either you have creativity or you don't. So I think, and this is something that, of course, Professor Ramos has talked about even in his own literature. I think once we move away from the idea that creativity is not a skill, but that it is a skill that we desperately need, we will be more open to generating or facilitating spaces for people to develop those skills in creativity. Because for example, just to get a little personal, I am not an education major. My bachelor's degree is in interpersonal communication. My husband's degree is in risk management. So we're in completely different fields, right? For everyday problem solving and things like this, I have taken some of the practices that we have learned in class, put them in front of somebody who is in a corporate setting, and told him, this is how you generate creativity. This is how you generate productivity through creativity and through creative thought. And in that way, he has been a little bit more open to using creative problem solving because now he has the tools and the skills to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I think if we can somehow figure out to get the idea that this is not a skill, that you either are born with it or you're not, we can go so much further in research and things than we have gone.
There's a lot to be said about skill development and how we have to accept that we are not good at it at first. And that creates a little bit more of intellectual humility. I embrace not being good at it so I can become better.
Yeah. Which is the case with all skills, right? You start at different levels and then through deliberate practice, we improve. But it takes some tolerance along the way because growth takes time, right? So, Amanda, I really appreciate your take on this. I think you are all very fortunate at Texas A&M to have this as a program. We need to get more of this in universities around the world. At my latest count, there's something like 70 some colleges and universities that offer courses and programs in creativity. And when you think there are 25,000 universities around the world, that's a very small percentage. So lots of work left to do, but we're so pleased for you all at Texas A&M. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I've got 5 minutes after the hour. The next set of concurrent sessions start, if I remember correctly, in about 10 minutes. So let's give a round of applause. And if you would, drop in the chat box any words of appreciation for our panel so that they can see and receive some positive energy from you all. Thank you again for joining the Creativity Expert Exchange. Enjoy the next session you go to. Hopefully I'll see some of you for the State of the Center for Applied Imagination updates later this afternoon. Thank you, Texas A&M team. Well done.
Thank you.